Welcome to the Intersection of AI and Cybersecurity webinar powered by Infused Innovations. I'm your host, Justin Starboard. Before we get started, it would be great to have you share where you are and where you're joining us from. I want to make sure that the comments are working before we get started. We'll use the comment section for Q&A after we get after the webinar is complete. And today it's such an interesting topic to be talking about cybersecurity. Every day it seems we get a notification on Twitter or news alert on LinkedIn about a cybersecurity breach that has leaked private consumer information or employee information across the web. The attacks that make the news are the ones that are have the juiciest headlines and are maybe of a well-known brand. You may have seen some in the news more recently. Yet there are as many as 2,200 cyber attacks every single day and 800,000 a year globally. Thankfully, they're not all successful. However, of the ones that are successful, at least here in the US, the average breach cost the US company around $9.4 million. And these are just the ones that are being reported. AI, machine learning, and other emerging techniques have made finding and exploiting 0 days, creating malware, and building personalized phishing attacks easier than ever before, especially for the nefarious actors that are looking to make money off of our negligence. There are as many as 300,000 new or customized variants of malware created every single day. Of course, the healthcare and financial sectors continue to be primary targets, as are sectors with traditionally lower budgets like nonprofit organizations and educational institutions. But that doesn't mean that other industries are safe. However, that said, I promise today isn't all about doom and gloom. Jeff Wilhelm, CEO of Infused Innovations, has dedicated his career to preventing these attacks and protecting Infused clients from being exposed should an attack actually get through. From creating best-in-class education for clients to implementing the best suite of solutions available, Jeff has been a pioneer in the space, and Infused Innovations is a recognized and industry-awarded leader for zero trust implementations, including novel and automated response architectures and a vocal embrace of shift-left concepts. Today, Jeff is poised to share with us his insights on the intersection of AI and cybersecurity. First, he will spend some of the time reflecting on the current threat landscape and risk around most organizational response models. Then Jeff will dive right into what's important, areas of AI and cybersecurity interplay, and discuss strategies applicable to businesses of all sizes and across industry. He will spend time exploring ways in which you can deploy tools, leveraging AI and machine learning to help protect your organization. Finally, all of which will paint the picture of what's on the horizon for 2024 for cybersecurity and beyond. Well, without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Jeff Wilhelm, CEO of Infused Innovations, to the webinar. Man, Jeff, sometimes that's a mouthful. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Justin, and thanks everyone for attending. I see some familiar names, which is always nice. If you've listened to our podcast, Digitally Transformed, or have participated in any of our webinars in the past, welcome back. And for anyone who was in the audience at my ISC2 keynote in Boston a few weeks ago, there are a couple of slides that are the same, but mostly new content. So as Justin said, this webinar is about how AI is changing the cybersecurity industry. And to help you learn more about the tools you can incorporate into your organizational protection models as you plan for the future. Of course, we also have to acknowledge the 2023 hot news story of generative AI itself. The information sharing, privacy, and trust models related to that has its own needs for security around implementation and usage. But hey, if you're attending this webinar to learn more about cybersecurity and the impacts AI is having on the tooling, you're in the right place. So without further ado, let me switch to the next slide here. So super quick background. I promise this will be 2 minutes or less. But who are we? For anyone who's not familiar with Infused Innovations, as our company name would indicate, we are all about infusing innovation into the work we do with our clients to help them unlock strategic brilliance, as we like to say, that they can bring within their own industries and to their own customers. We do this through a combined approach that blends our three main practice areas: strategic advisory, technical delivery, which includes cloud and cyber, as well as data and other engineering services, and our innovation lab, which works with clients on new and emerging technologies. We're also proud to be a 4 consecutive year Inc. 5000 awardee, a Microsoft US Partner Award winner in modern work and security. Given the topic of these slides, I should also mention we hold the certification in responsible AI practices. As I mentioned on the previous slide, we have 3 primary practice areas. I will not read all of this, but in most cases, the work we do across with our clients is across all of these delivery areas, not just one. So feel free to check out our website or LinkedIn or reach out for more information. But without further ado, let's dive into the content for today, the agenda for today. So we're going to focus on a few specific things, as Justin said, starting with laying out the current threat landscape and discussing some of the challenges we're seeing in the common response strategies that a lot of us probably employ or have built up over the years. We're going to set the stage around some of the limitations that we see in the current tooling and processes that demonstrate why AI is not just an important improvement, but frankly, a required one. And then we're going to dive into the impacts that we're seeing on AI on the cybersecurity space. I'll talk about the specifics of those areas. I think there's 8 or 10 of them. We're going to break them into 4 groups. We'll get into that in a minute. And then, of course, we're going to discuss the overall strategic roadmap and planning that we believe organizations should be focused on going into 2024.
You know, Jeff, there's been a lot of things in the news recently in quotes from some really impactful folks, from the industry. The first here is from Mike Rogers, former NSA director, noting that AI is a double-edged sword in that it both increases the ability of adversaries to penetrate systems, but also provides us the ability to anticipate and react to, what they're doing. We've had another one here from Jenny Mina at Sally Mae, expressing a similar sentiment that AI is both a threat and an opportunity, which we'll talk about today, and that AI can remove the burden of some administrative work, including that of, security analysts. And finally, Chris Novak from Verizon, he notes that companies, assuming that they implement, AI tools, can have the upper hand, for a short amount of time, both that attackers will catch up and that our technology will also be an adversary for them. So this reinforces the point for a lot of us to repeat often, which is that cybersecurity is not something that you do to completion. It's something that you never stop doing and never stop improving.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think a lot of the folks that are on the webinar today will sort of recognize the challenges that we're all facing, right? We open the newspaper, we turn the TV on, we read LinkedIn, and what do we see, right? We see a complex cybersecurity landscape. So first, we've got rapidly expanding attack surfaces. That could be a proliferation of applications, users working from new and different physical locations, staff working from a greater variety of devices. And actually, that's without even really getting into the other vectors of attack, like supply chain attacks, where we have, generally speaking, less visibility and control than we've previously been able to exert. And, at the same time, the strategies that attackers are using are continuing to evolve as well. We've got the common ones like, phishing attacks, business email compromise, more sophisticated attacks, adversary in the middle, for example, thefts of session tokens. Users have MFA fatigue in some cases, and other bypasses that can sort of impact their lives. And then we've got stolen credentials actively available on the internet. And attackers constantly probing our environments, looking for that unpatched VPN terminator or some RDP endpoint that's a software revision behind, or getting software on to bring your own device or something like that. Once you've got a foothold, lateral movement is not overly difficult. And making matters even more complicated is that a lot of the time we end up seeing customers sort of having that frustrating conversation about, do we pay ransom if we get breached or not, or whatever it might be. And honestly, I've been in some of those conversations, and some of the ransomware. Customer support organizations have better, their organized crime customer support lines are better than some of the companies that we have to deal with legitimately on a daily basis, right? Pretty crazy to think about that. And then, of course, at the same time, no surprise, the cost and complexity of doing security right is increasing. And this is where the potential of AI and automation has the biggest impact to save money and make sure that humans are involved in the right places. So, I think this is a really important slide for folks to sort of level set around. It sets the stage for how organizations have traditionally responded to threats using, again, a somewhat traditional approach of SIM, right? Security and information and event management, SOAR, security orchestration, automation, and response, and a SOC, a security operations center, and the delays in response times from this traditional approach. So this slide is going to build as I talk through it. But you can see on the far left, all SIM platforms, whether it's Sentinel or Splunk or Chronicle, QRadar, whatever, all of these platforms are what we would consider post-attack detection tools, right? When you're trying to correlate alerts across multiple vendors, you have to wait for each vendor to write activity to their internal logs. And then, of course, we have to wait for that log to get shipped up into your SIM tool of choice. Let's pick an example of, okay, I have, antivirus on the desktop and I have, a cloud-based SIM. It can still take, a couple of minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes for the logs to actually get into sort of the SIM's data lake, right? And if you're using another platform, like, for example, like CrowdStrike with its open XDR reference architecture, where they take in signals from, Microsoft or Okta or Proofpoint or whatever for their XDR detections, it's still a SIM model. It's not first party XDR, and you have this delay before the logs, sort of hit the SIM, right? So then the logs have hit the SIM, and I'll use Splunk as an example here. I know a lot of organizations that are using Splunk as their data lake. They talk about how their scheduled detections are on 5, 10, or 15-minute schedules because you can't do real-time detections on 1,200 indicators of compromise or indicators of attack in real time when you're ingesting thousands or millions of logs at a time. Of course, a cloud SIM like Sentinel or Splunk Enterprise Cloud, you might see a little bit less delay here. But my point is that it's not real time. It's post-attack correlation and detection. So once the logs have hit the SIM, now we would have our scheduled detections run and maybe some security orchestration, automation, and response rules that get triggered, right? And what happens then? We hit an API, we hit a webhook, we wait for some delay, a couple minute delay for a validation of the response that the requested action has been taken. And that action could be any number of things depending on the rules that you have written and the actions that you take. And of course, all of this is assuming that you have defined detections and responses. If you don't have an automated response here, then of course the alert will then get kicked over to a tier 1 analyst, right? And even for strong teams, that could be a 10 or 15-minute SLA. I know CrowdStrike likes to quote publicly, I think 1 minute to detect, 10 minutes to triage, and 60 minutes to contain. So, even that is obviously, when you're talking about the speed of modern attacks can be quite long. And, in a lot of cases, you're kicking this up to a tier 2 analyst to do a response playbook review or engaging incident response or do some sort of, attack resolution or attack engagement. So a lot happening there, and the time stacks, right? This time stacks up. At the same time, as all of this is happening, the attacker could be spreading laterally and doing additional attacks, all of which are generating more logs. And these, isolated alerts have to get strung together. That could be a human doing that in real time in a, legacy SIM platform. It could be a team trying to figure out what is the breadth of this attack, as it's moving laterally. And this entire process just keeps repeating. I'm going to talk about XDR in a few minutes as one of the places where AI is having an impact here. But the point is that the SIM, the XDR automated response, automated attack disruption would be taking place in that first minute or two before the logs are likely even hitting the SIM tool, before scheduled detection rules are running, before automated response happens, before a tier 1 analyst has a chance to even know anything's happening. So we'll come back to all of that. Point being that I wanted to set the stage to show, of course, that the data is showing that threat actors are moving more quickly, they have more agility, they have increased tooling, improved tooling. And in many cases, we have attacks that are happening upstream of our organizations anyway. I'm looking at, MoveIt and SolarWinds and all of the other, WSFTP, I think recently, a few others, making hundreds or thousands of organizations vulnerable all at the same time, right? So the TTR, the time to respond of the typical model, the SIM-SOAR SOC model, it's no longer viable for real-time attack disruption. And that is really the takeaway of that previous slide. I think that there's a lot of instances here where attacks are moving just so quickly and sometimes never even touching an endpoint where AV, EDR, MDR would be installed. So diving into XDR is one of the options, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, something that we're going to discuss.
Jeff, I feel like you're, setting a great stage here for where we're going to jump into. And there are a number of AI tools that, companies can deploy. So it's not all doom and gloom. I mean, I feel like, looking at this and thinking that after 120 minutes, how compromised a business could be, is pretty scary. And oftentimes, that's the threat. And you also mentioned, that these organizations are oftentimes more streamlined than many businesses that are above board, and that is such a fascinating fact because the way that these attacks are moving are so quick and they have such an impact. And we see from the headlines how much money that they actually can cost. So where are some of the tools located now that we can actually use?
Thanks, Justin. Totally right. And I tried to group these into 4 categories. There's maybe 8 or 10 different tools. I'm going to talk about them categorically. So first, again, I will talk about SIM, SOAR, and SOC, even though I talked about it being more of a post-breach sort of detection and response tool. I'm going to talk about some of the places where AI is improving the response times and correlation and that sort of, large data analytical sort of, capabilities. So I will talk about that. I'm going to, as I alluded to, talk pretty extensively about XDR. XDR, I realized I didn't actually say what that stood for. Extended detection and response. And also going to talk about UEBA, which is user and entity behavior analytics. And again, the impact of AI on tooling in those areas. I'm going to talk about vulnerability management and attack path analysis. These are more of that pre-breach sort of what can I do to increase my organizational posture. And then I'm going to talk about something that's been in the news, especially around Gen AI, which is Security Copilot and the overall theme of threat intelligence platforms. So that will be sort of the layout of the next set of slides. I'll dive right in. So even though, as I said a moment ago, we don't think that SIM, SOAR, SOC is fast enough for a modern attack chain, we do believe that SIM tools are critically important for an organization to have deployed, right? Don't go rip them out. If you've got them. They provide long-term storage, auditing, assessment capabilities around posture, and they help organizations guide their sort of areas of improvement. It is, of course, important to note, though, that AI is having a significant impact on these platforms, across the board. So, AI technologies, and we've all heard about machine learning and deep learning, they have enhanced threat detection and response capabilities. They've improved SIM, SOAR, and SOC capabilities by analyzing large volumes of security logs, network traffic, other data sources, as I'm sure everyone can imagine. But at the same time, obviously an improvement in the identification algorithmically of patterns, anomalies, and indicators of attack or indicators of compromise that might go unnoticed by the more traditional sort of rule-based systems. So this can help in detecting advanced threats and responding to them, obviously in a timely manner. Newer SIM tools and cloud-native SIM tools significantly can reduce false positives as well, which is really important because traditional security tools can often generate a high number of alerts, and that can overwhelm security analysts and making it challenging to identify, real threats. So AI algorithms can prioritize and bring sort of the signal to noise ratio a bit, more allowing security teams to focus on critical incidents. It also can improve the incident response times, as we talked about. Still not as fast as XDR, but I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. It can improve the runbook sort of playbook side of things in SOAR. isolating compromised systems, blocking malicious activities, initiating remediation, things like that. But still providing a single view of an organization's security posture, which is really, really important as it has for years. And overall, just enhancing these sort of threat intelligence and what can our organizations do to improve. A lot of our customers, a lot of organizations, I think a very high percentage of organizations are in the Microsoft ecosystem for things like Exchange, Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, whatever they might be using. I'll use Sentinel as an example, which is the cloud native SIM tool from Microsoft. Sentinel ingests logs across the ecosystem. So it could be cloud, it could be servers, endpoints, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, SaaS tools, Amazon, Google, on-prem environments, pretty much, whatever, users, devices, data, all the stuff that's happening in our environments today. Whatever SIM tool you're using, I recommend looking at their roadmap around what tooling, AI, and ML and automation improvements are in the pipeline. At the end of the day, a good SIM tool should be able to collect your data at scale from users, applications, devices, data, cloud footprints, et cetera, regardless of where those assets are located. It should help you stay ahead of the threat landscape, and it should help you save time and decrease response time by adding in automation where appropriate. So AI is having a big impact there. I talked about XDR quite a bit, at the through the conversation earlier, and obviously extended detection and response, or as some folks call it, cross-domain detection and response, because we are talking about signal correlation across multiple domains. And UEBA, user and entity behavior analytics, AI is having an impact on these areas as well, these tools as well. The AI improvements in XDR, for example, have a major impact on decreasing the time to respond, as the best XDRs in the market will allow for automatic attack disruption much more quickly than a human SOC team could respond to. AI technologies, as I mentioned a moment ago, through machine learning and deep learning, they've improved threat detection capabilities because not only are they analyzing vast amounts of information, they're allowing for the prioritization of the information that is surfaced. It's really important to remember too that with the user, sort of behavioral analytics side, we want to understand our user and entity behavior across the various systems and networks that they're using, and how that deviates from normal sort of baseline behavior. That's how we can identify insider threats or accidents in some cases, compromised accounts, unusual activities, or of course, ongoing attacks, even novel attacks that might not be part of an automated response rule in a traditional SIM, for example, a SOAR rule, right? With UEBA, the personas are becoming increasingly narrow. So it's no longer, what is normal for my company, as it sort of used to be. It's more not even what's normal for this department. Now it's what's normal for this user when they work at this location, at this time of day, on this device. Extremely narrow personas to understand, what is truly a risk factor versus what's just, a false positive.
I'm going to stop you right there for just a second, because one of the things we've talked often about is that balance between innovation and security for the enterprise. And, you've mentioned many times that it's better to knock that one offline that may have nefarious activities going on versus bringing down an entire system. And you do a great job, and Infused does a great job of walking clients through that. Do you want to expound on that just a little bit here?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, you know what? I think I've got a slide. So let me touch on sort of the automatic attack disruption, then I'll touch on sort of the 99% versus 1% false positive, and how easy it is, by the way, if that accidental false positive happens, to undo the action. But your point is exactly right. We would much rather disrupt an attack at the 99% confidence threshold, or accidentally disable one user at the 1% false positive, because that means that the attack doesn't have a chance to laterally spread and incur huge amounts of cost and data exfiltration or potential risk to the organization. But if that 1% does happen, the undo button is right there. And I'm going to talk about that in just a sec. In fact, I'm actually going to walk through some real attack chains in a minute. But as you can see, the slide that I just popped over to, the point here is that we want to correlate signals, identify attacks, and automatically isolate users or accounts as quickly as possible, right? As you said, Justin, that's really critically important. We want to make sure that a quick response can mean the difference between successful exploitation and a blocked attack versus, buying that incident response team the time they need to stop something. So, I'll use a real world example really quickly, right? MGM, right? We all just read about MGM. I think it was maybe a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months at this point. But the MGM scenario had I think $100 million price tag associated with it, right? Entra ID, what used to be Azure Active Directory, Entra ID could absolutely have recognized that there was an unusual sign-on happening. I believe they use Okta. Okta has a connector in Defender for cloud apps to detect suspicious activity, and correlating that with a lateral traversal of the on-prem activity that we know happened. They could have disrupted that attack automatically had they had some of these tools that they're probably already paying for implemented. But the takeaway here, as you said, Justin, is really the ability to correlate the signals, do real-time attack disruption. And a good tool isn't going to just tell you the story of the attack, right? The activities, accounts, machines, et cetera, but give you automatic disruption of the attack. And you can see hopefully a couple of red text areas on this slide that's showing either preemptive disruption of the attack or automatic disruption of the attack. And as you said, Justin, these are 99% confidence threshold, 99% signal to noise ratio, hunter-trained AIs that are trained by Mystic, which is the Microsoft Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center, which is part of Microsoft Security Research. So yes, they do have potentially that 1% false positive rate, but let's be a little bit honest too with ourselves. Even a mature SOC can have a 10 to 20% false positive rate. So, I consider these high fidelity detections, combining signals across, sort of users, behaviors, activities, authentications, devices, et cetera, cross domain. Really, really, really important. And by the way, I should mention too, if you're using Microsoft 365, you may already be paying for this. So you might have a great MDR tool deployed. You might have a great EDR tool deployed. That's great. You're probably already paying for automatic attack disruption as well. So worth looking into that. Might just be configuring and enabling a couple of tools in your environment. As you said just a minute ago, Justin, those automatic response actions can be sign-in restrictions, right? Denying certain type of sign-in for a compromised account. And that can take effect immediately, regardless of the account state. Could be active account, service account, whatever, in the authority it belongs to. And that control, the sign-in restriction control, can actively block most attacker capabilities, even if an attacker is already authenticated before the compromise was identified. But there are other controls as well. We can intercept SMB activity, denying inbound file system access, which would limit an attacker's ability to steal data or destroy data. You can limit ransomware encryption over SMB, for example, block lateral movement, including, for example, anyone technical in the audience might be thinking, well, a payload could be created on a remote device using, PsExec or similar tool. These controls can also block that sort of activity as well. Also, RPC-based protocols. Again, I know I'm a little technical here. I'll bring it back up in a second, but RPC-based protocols, DC sync, DP API, privilege escalation, print spooler, those sorts of RPC-based protocols also can be automatically disrupted, automatically blocked if that is part of an attack chain. Also, disconnecting or terminating already active attack sessions, and a whole bunch of other sort of possibilities here. But also quickly the ability to undo if that 1%, as Justin alluded to a few minutes ago, happens. Click release from containment or re-enable user, and your IT or SecOps team can quickly undo that, potential, 1% false positive if that happens. Let me walk through a few attack chains just to paint this in real world, real world sort of attack scenarios. So adversary in the middle attack, pretty common these days, increasingly common these days, especially sort of building on top of the traditional like business email compromise that we may have seen. Historically, there's a lot of good toolkits out there that attackers can use, maybe imitating a corporate logon page or intercepting credentials or session tokens via some common methods. In a common attack scenario, an attacker sends an email. In this case, actually, The link wasn't blocked by a URL scanning because the link itself wasn't actually malicious. The link was a modification of the Chrome browser to set up a reverse proxy. So that way, the next time a user goes to sign in, their credentials can be stolen. The session can be stolen. So, again, somewhat common attack these days. I'm sure a lot of organizations have dealt with session impersonation and session theft. But what happens, right? The stolen credentials or session cookies happen. But in a lot of our environments, Enter ID will detect, of course, or Defender for Office might detect, or Defender for Endpoint, if you have that deployed, might detect some of these things happening and start correlating these signals. So 20 minutes later, in this exact attack chain, an attacker attempts to replay the session cookie that was stolen. That login from an unusual location would be detected. Again, any of us who are using conditional access or the Enter ID capabilities, Defender for Cloud Apps, that would be potentially an unusual location sign-in that would get noticed. And then, of course, what happens? The attacker tries to do a inbox manipulation rule. Again, we've all seen this happen, and that would be detected as well. All of this correlation starts happening, and this is an automated attack that can be disrupted with those correlations. Those are using multiple indicators of attack or indicators of compromise, and that can be disrupted. And you can see in this case, I think it was 4 minutes from initial access to the user being disabled, which is great, right? Probably a lot quicker than it would have hit the SIM tool, probably quicker than we would have been able to respond in real time, a human response in real time. I think it's also important to talk about ransomware. This is another one that I think we've all sort of had to contend with over the years. So this is a real ransomware attack chain. This is a case study against an EU customer, 1,000 endpoints. But this was also influenced in real time. The reason I want to use this example, though, is because this automatic attack disruption influenced endpoint policies in real time against an attack that was happening against unmanaged endpoints in the environment. So it's a really interesting one. I find this one really interesting, at least. So in this instance, an attacker has gained access to the environment. I think this was through an RDP endpoint using a compromised credentials. They log in, 8 a.m. log in, right? They try to deploy, in this case, Lockbit ransomware, which gets detected and blocked by Endpoint AV, which is great, real-time protection. In this real-world example, the attacker actually ends up spending some time trying to disable the tamper protection that's blocking the attacker from making a real attack possible on this first machine. However, they quickly move to scanning the network as they do and find 5 unmanaged devices, which they quickly laterally move to. Using existing vulnerabilities and the toolkits that they have, they're able to gain, escalate their privileges, move laterally. And of course, at this point, even though this is on-prem, assuming we've deployed Defender for Identity on our Active Directory domain controllers, we've now seen these accounts that aren't normally laterally moving in this way through the environment, laterally moving in an unusual way. That is likely an indicator of a compromised account. So what happens? About a minute later, MDI, says we're compromised. We're going to disable those accounts. That happens in both Enter ID, so cloud, and on-premise Active Directory. All the user tokens are automatically revoked when they get disabled. The machines in the attack, and this is really, really interesting. Even though the compromise has happened against 5 unmanaged devices, firewall rules were pushed to the managed devices in the environment so that traffic could not move. Whoops, I didn't mean to go forward there. Traffic could not move laterally from those compromised devices to the managed devices. Let me just rephrase that really, really quickly. An ad hoc firewall rule was pushed that says any of these enrolled devices must immediately stop communicating with the 5 compromised machines. Really, really important point there, because even though the attack happened on unmanaged devices, which by definition are unmanaged, we block traffic to all the managed devices to protect that lateral movement from happening. I think that's really an important takeaway here. In this case, that was about 14 minutes from the first successful attack to that automatic disruption. So really, really, I think an important point. Let me go back to the next item in the agenda, since I dove probably a little too deep into XDR and UEBA there. But let me go to the next item on the agenda, which is the vulnerability management and attack path analysis side of the conversation. AI is having a substantial impact in these areas as well. Really important for organizations to recall that it's important before all those attacks happen that we're analyzing our environment for vulnerabilities and understanding what attack paths exist. So AI-powered vulnerability management solutions, they automate the scanning and identification of vulnerabilities across complex and dynamic environments. They can scan systems, network assets, applications, cloud, on-prem, et cetera, to identify known vulnerabilities and misconfigs. And this automation improves the efficiency of the vulnerability management process. It also reduces the time required for the manual scanning and analysis. So obviously AI algorithms help with analyzing this vast amounts of data. And it's not just about finding the vulnerabilities, it's about prioritizing vulnerabilities by severity. I'm sorry, Justin, what was that?
No, I was gonna. You caught me there. I was gonna jump in and ask you a question about that because where did the AI? Where is the AI taught? Where's the machine learning? Gaining their knowledge of these threats. Is it both on the potential threat and the things that are out on the web, as well as internally in the data that patterns of employees, and does it matter in terms of size of enterprise that the AI or machine learning is deployed on?
Yeah, I'll answer the last one first. So the good news is that with these tools and the billions of dollars of investment that is going into them, the things that are benefiting the large organizations are also benefiting the smaller ones. So I think that's a major change over the last decade, where it used to be that some of the stuff we're talking about here was only attainable for the Fortune 1000, and now it's really democratized the landscape quite a bit. And to your first question, yeah, this is constantly evolving. So we've got, and I'm going to talk about threat intelligence platforms in a minute too, which sort of take industry knowledge and industry research and the work coming out of threat intelligence centers all over the world. In this case, Microsoft's billions of dollars in security research and all that kind of stuff. But also the things that are happening in all of our environments, and really correlates all that stuff. But it matters what is happening in our environment. So our network topologies, our cloud exposures, our security configurations, our vulnerabilities, and it matters how we have our environments configured. So all of that comes into play. In fact, in the next slide, I'm going to show a screenshot of that, which is an example of how we can see a very specific sort of attack path, and how it's really important to understand, where we fall in the risk posture here, because different assets that are exposed, some for very good reason, right? A SaaS application or customer facing application, they're exposed for good reasons. But if someone were to compromise one of these applications, where can they move laterally? What data access do they have from there? So really, really important. So this screenshot is, again, these are things we should, as important as automatic attack disruption is, these are things we want to do before an attack to understand the risk posture of the assets in our environment, as I said. So this example is an attack path analysis interface. This is the one in Defender for Cloud. We like this one because it works across Google and Amazon and Microsoft and hybrid cloud and your on-prem environments, whatever. But this screenshot will show you, how the tool allows a security team to understand the relationship between resources, accounts, storage, and how a potential attack chain and what the impact of those would be, to allow us to prioritize where we attack organizational or environmental risks. We all know any asset in an environment can be part of that risk model for exploitation, right? Literally anything. So addressing these before an incident is obviously critical. And these tools help organizations, take that responsibility seriously, because it's not just their data; it's oftentimes customer data and their reputation that's on the line. So you alluded to something else too, Justin, which is sort of the overall landscape, and that sort of falls in the category of TIPs, threat intelligence platforms. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Security Copilot as well in this conversation, which I'm sure a lot of folks have heard of, especially in sort of all the generative AI conversations that have been happening recently. But as we've discussed already, right? AI technologies, they are great at analyzing vast amounts of data from various sources. This is no exception to that. These platforms like threat intelligence platforms, they take sort of that, correlation of logs one step further by providing enhanced threat visibility, the contextual understanding that you were asking about a minute ago, and the facilitation of sharing of threat intelligence both within and across organizations, right? Some organizations and some verticals are attacked more than others, but we can all benefit from the knowledge that comes from the AI algorithmic analysis and categorization of that threat intelligence data. It also makes it easier for security analysts to search, filter, and prioritize, as I mentioned a moment ago, the information. I'll talk really quickly about Security Copilot, because I think it's really one of the most interesting evolutions of the security sort of ecosystem. So I'm sure everyone's heard of Microsoft Security Copilot, sort of the tagline of defending the enterprise at the speed of AI, which has really been, the focus of this whole webinar. I'll bring up the buzzword one more time of generative AI at the same time, just to get everyone, paying attention again here. So we talked about how delivering security in a coherent way across the broadest set of vectors is a fundamental promise of XDR. We talked about that. We talked about how organizations struggle from the manual traversal of multiple disconnected tools and data sets, and how do we protect all of these assets within our environment? Let's say generative AI can help us, right? So, first, it can build incident summaries with a single click. That's kind of important to helping our organizations understand whether that's upstream communication to the board of directors or downstream communication to the teams within the organization that need to know what is happening and what's going on and how do I communicate this effectively. And I'll show a quick screenshot of that. On the right blade, you can see Security Copilot, and this is an overlay on a screenshot I showed earlier. This allows incident summaries to be built. A complete post-response activity report can be generated, right? And you can see that hopefully on the screen. And that can provide guided incident response at the speed of machine, right? It can provide security analysts of any skill level, by the way, a set of really specific and tailored recommendations for remediation and response. And again, generative AI helps build that based on a lot of model training, but a lot of good information from the threat landscape as well. Third, it can provide a natural language interface to building queries that can simplify threat hunting, whether that's proactively hunting for cyber threats or extending capabilities to existing incidents. Those queries are a really critical part of any SOC's, sort of team. Help you generate the KQL, the custom query language queries that a lot of us on the call are probably familiar with. One of the most interesting capabilities, in my opinion, though, is the real-time malware analysis. Understanding and reverse engineering malware has, to date, only been accessible to the most advanced incident responders. But now with generative AI and Security Copilot, in my opinion, this becomes so much easier to analyze and understand, even obfuscated, scripting and other, sort of document flows and other, ransomware attacks that are happening. Again, even obfuscated ones. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, this provides threat intelligence right at the fingertips of the responder. So let me recap. I know I talked relatively quickly. I was trying to be mindful of time and leaving time to answer some questions here. Super quick recap, then I'm going to pivot into the strategic guidance that goes into your planning for 2024. So listen, at a high level, again, SIM, SOAR, SOC, all really, really important stuff. But there is a struggle to keep up with the speed and complexity of modern attacks. Organizations that aren't looking at things like XDR, UEBA, that aren't doing vulnerability management, that aren't doing attack path analysis, those are areas of focus that allow you to be more proactive. And I think those are sort of the high level, sort of recap of what we talked about before. But we all know that as we're looking forward into 2024, zero trust, and not to sort of, use an overplayed, sort of term here, but, zero trust is a really important principle. And it's been part of the story for years. So obviously, if you're not already doing that, clearly, please do follow that posture. But zero trust, for anyone who's not familiar with it, right, allows us to get away from that traditional security model, which really overly relied on the concept of a trusted perimeter and this assumption that our internal networks were just, they were just safe, right? Zero trust is that never trust, always verify approach, treating every user, device, and application as potentially untrusted until verified. So, if your organization hasn't taken that posture, please, get off this webinar right now and take that seriously. But more importantly, I think more recently is the shift left sort of strategy, right? So if you're not familiar with shift left is, we'll call it an organizational posture that allows organizations to emphasize the integration of security practices and testing earlier in their development life cycles, rather than waiting towards the end. So by embracing shift left, you can identify vulnerabilities and weaknesses earlier. And that's true whether you're doing internal product development for tooling internal to your organizations, or software development or external product development that's customer facing in the field. Frankly, it just allows for an overall more cost-effective and efficient remediation and addressing security concerns earlier on. If you are not performing regular attack path analysis, please add that to your agenda for 2024. Please review what you have as capabilities in that area. And obviously, any organization that's really serious about responding to these threats in real time needs to be looking at XDR as a component of their threat landscape. So the combination of sort of the zero trust, shift left, the delivery of internal attack path analysis, and XDR, it creates a powerful defense system that allows an organization's security posture to be a robust defense against modern threats. And as we talked about at the very, very beginning, these threats are evolving quickly. Attackers are using AI to find vulnerabilities and move laterally more quickly. So if we're not responding at the same speed that they are attacking, we are unfortunately going to be behind. And some of the quotes at the beginning hopefully painted that picture. And of course, if you have a great partner that you trust, please talk to them about implementing the stuff. If you don't, please give us a call, and I will toss it back to Justin. I'm sure there's some questions that came in, and I will leave it there.
Jeff, thank you so much, for this webinar today. It certainly is a comprehensive overview of AI, machine learning, and where that intersection of cybersecurity is. Having listened to it and watching you and getting to know the subject, it's less of an intersection and more of an intertwinement, right? I mean, it is going forward, this is the way things will be. Thinking about all of these topics that we discussed, I think we could probably put together a webinar on every single one of these pillars. So we won't do that today, of course, but fortunately there are some questions that have come up. The first question we had was a little bit about earlier on in the discussion about detection of an attack, and identifying if that is real or not. Do you have a sense of that 1% and maybe go through that a little bit differently?
Yeah, sure. So the 99% sort of signal to noise ratio is based on what is classified as what we'll call hunter-trained AI. So what does that mean, right? And how do we know if these are legitimate attacks, that we're going to autonomously disrupt? Because people get anxious when we talk about autonomously disrupting anything, autonomously doing anything. We just have to look at the last, 12 months of, what does Gen AI mean for the future, and how is artificial intelligence changing everything, right? So anytime we talk about sort of automatically doing anything, people get admittedly anxious, right? So when we say hunter-trained AI, what we mean is we've got organizations out there that have been attacked over the years. We know this, right? Organizations have been attacked for years, and a lot of them have tools that will ingest, store all this information and ingest it into SIM. So we know in retrospect what an attack chain looks like, what events lead into it, what alerts are being generated, what lateral movement is common, what account compromises look like, what privilege escalations are happening. We know in real, not in real time, what those backwards looking attacks look like. So when we say hunter-trained AI, these are the threat hunters saying, take everything that happened in these successful attacks and build that 99% confidence model against the successful attacks. What did we see happen before, and how can we more quickly and autonomously react more quickly when those things happen in the future? So they are based on actual attacks that have been successful, as well as what the hallmarks are both indicators of attack and indicators of compromise, what the hallmarks are of what a potential compromise could be. So I hope that answers the question. If it doesn't, feel free to send me a LinkedIn message one-on-one. Happy to get on a call and chat about it more.
You mentioned this, another question, it looks like from Kathleen, about, there being a democratization of the technology available. But, cybersecurity generally also comes with cost, or you've mentioned an investment. But, what are the cost differences? Where are there breaks, and how are they different between enterprise and maybe smaller businesses?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. So I mentioned how 10 years ago some of this stuff was only affordable for enterprise organizations, right? And then over the last 5 years, it's democratized and the costs have come down. When COVID hit, Microsoft bundled a lot of their tools into Suite, the Suite packages, F5, A5, E5, the mini SKUs for E5 security, et cetera, that a lot of organizations are already paying for. So I think it is important to acknowledge Kathleen's question, which is there are still some aspects, especially Security Copilot, that are still, Fortune 1000, but pretty much every other thing I mentioned is attainable, in some case at zero cost for the actual licensing side of it. Implementation costs may vary depending on your environment, complexity, regulatory alignment, et cetera. That's my quick asterisk on that statement. But the costs of doing about 95% of what I said in this presentation, some organizations are paying for already and don't even know it. In other cases, it is inconsequential of a cost. The one that Kathleen called out in her question was Security Copilot. And yes, as of the last 2 months of the announcements around Security Copilot, that is still attainable to the larger organizations. But just as those other tools that I mentioned went from attainable to large organizations to now attainable to everybody, I anticipate Security Copilot will as well. Let's talk about this again in 6 months, maybe 12 months, and see where we are.
Well, I mean, it is crazy to think of how quickly things like this move. I mean, we're talking in 2 weeks will be ChatGPT's year birthday, at 1 year birthday, and so these tools are becoming more and more not just available but also varying in strength. Another question that came up was about are the tools that we're talking about robust enough to handle some of these attacks, and are they? I'll add to that is, are they strong enough for what's coming, or just strong enough to handle what's already occurred?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And actually, there's sort of the AI models more traditionally, right? Sort of Gen AI more traditionally, where we do worry about things like bias and, is this model fair? Is it inclusive? Is it responsible? And I talked about our responsible AI certification earlier. So I would love whoever this user is, please reach out. Let's talk about responsible AI and how it's important for organizations to approach this in a really thoughtful way. But from a security perspective, like we talk about defense in depth all the time, having an automated response is great, right? Because it makes the attack disrupted more quickly before a security team might even know about it. But it isn't the only answer. Let's say something slips through the cracks. You still want your SIM tool to alert your SOC. You still want to have incident response. This is a layered defense mechanism. This is defense in depth. This is a layered approach. So nobody's saying it's 100% perfect, but I will say that even novel attacks, even attacks that have not been seen before, even zero-day vulnerabilities that might come in via one means, but then follow a normal attack chain for lateral movement and privilege escalation and account compromise, et cetera, those will still be noticed by these, even if they've never been seen directly before in the exact pattern that might be coming up. And by the way, that's a big difference between an algorithmic response that you might see in an automatic, sort of a run book side, like a SIM-SOAR sort of run book, versus a more AI hunter-trained model, which is much less about, I saw these 5 things happen within 5 minutes, do this, and much more about, man, I'm just seeing these indicators that are consistent with what might be a compromise or an attack. And I really need to start correlating signals from as many places as possible so I get that confidence level to know that I want to disrupt something autonomously. So there's a difference there.
Great. Is there anything that we didn't cover that we should talk about?
Let's see. I will talk really quickly since we do have a couple minutes remaining. I can always fill the time. You guys know that. I will talk really quickly about, organizations a lot of times get worried about, man, this is overwhelming. Where the heck do I start? And of course, there are going to be places where, listen, if you're not doing, MFA today, please just get off this webinar and go do that. Like just do that first. Don't listen to me anymore. Go do MFA, right? And I'm using that somewhat hyperbolically. There's more than one thing that we should all be doing, of course. But there is this maturity model, and we should be cognizant of the fact that doing something is better than doing nothing. And it is hard to do everything optimally unless you've got a big team that can sort of do all these things and stay on top of them, right? I mean, this is not like, oh, I know it looks linear on the screen, but it's not like, oh, I got to optimal. Congratulations, everybody. Pat yourselves on the back and go home. We're safe. It's like, it's legitimately like as soon as you hit optimal, you are constantly doing optimal. You are constantly doing all these things. The techniques are changing. The tools are improving. The capabilities are always evolving. There is no stopping in cybersecurity. And we all know this. I mean, there is no stopping. If you stop and you stand still, you are sliding backwards. So, this maturity model is important, and we like to talk about this with our customers. I will put one more slide up just to sort of, in case if there are any more questions, interrupt me. But I do like this model because it breaks sort of that previous maturity model into some tangible steps that organizations can take. And we work with our customers all the time on this. We have they're called Zero Trust Security Accelerators. They're what won us our Microsoft Partner Award in 2021. They talk about sort of this progression, the Zero Trust accelerated progression. And absolutely, you can see right here, it goes from sort of what a traditional organization might be doing across identities, devices, apps, infrastructure, network, and data, through what a more advanced organization might be contending with and implementing, all the way to what an optimal, quote unquote, optimal organization might be embracing. So, yeah, again, happy to talk to anybody in more depth about any of this at any time. Reach out to our team, send us a LinkedIn message or a chat, or send an email to info@infusedinnovations.com. Book time with our team. Hopefully someone threw in the chat a bookings link or something like that. But we would love to talk to you more about this. I love talking to organizations about this stuff, as I'm sure you can see, and happy to do that to any interested party.
Yeah, the link to learn more from Infused is on the screen now. So it's infusedinnovations.com/intersection-of-AI-cybersecurity. Well, Jeff, thank you for your wealth of knowledge, your attention to detail, and for being a beacon of hope, for our attendees and our clients. This has been really, really helpful.
Thank you. And thanks for everyone for attending.
So thank you to our clients. Thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to our partners. Thank you to you, the attendees, for joining today. This has been a special presentation from Infused Innovation on the intersection of AI and cybersecurity. As we look forward to 2024, there are a number of things to consider, most important being that of who you partner with to implement best practices, assessing your level of exposure, and how to implement a plan that is right for you and your business. It'd be wonderful to schedule time with you using the link on the screen and to walk through how best to help you and the team be successful for the remainder of this year and into 2024. On behalf of Jeff, thanks for joining.